Hey, everybody. Welcome back to The Gold Mine. We have another fantastic show for you planned out today. We got first timer John is here. We got Chris joining us, and he has been on. It's been a little while, so I'm just excited that he is here. And Shaun, as always, loving this. Now, while I'm excited, y'all should be too. Do the things like the show, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, do all that good stuff. Get your emails whenever we go live, which is, of course, Wednesdays for The Gold Mine and Fridays for The Collective. If you have any thoughts, questions, comments, anything at all, by all means, put them up in the comment section. We can engage those throughout the show. Other than that, let's get some intros out of the way and we can get right into the convo. John, you're on top. 10, 15 seconds. Who are you? Where you come from? All the good stuff.
What's up, guys? My name is John Hamilton. I am a former Green Beret Night Stalker, spent 10 years in the military, transitioned out and built a team and Infinite Grit where we deliver strength and conditioning coaching for individuals who want to get into the tactical fitness realm.
Bam. I like it. Succinct. Chris, how about yourself?
Yeah, my name's Chris Lee, former Green Beret, spent 10 years in the Army. I loved most of it and got out and started mindset and performance coaching.
Bam. Love it. Shaun, how's life out in the mountains?
Good. You can always tell the guys who've had to explain themselves in an elevator. They got that pitch down like bam, bam, bam. It's good to see.
I love it. This is going to be a gooder. Today, we're going to be talking about being ready. And as I was just talking about this, is that, you know, for a lot of people, when they say, oh yeah, I really want to do this thing when I'm ready. But, and I'm sure you guys have heard this a million times, as have I, you're never really ready for anything. So I want to get your guys' first thoughts right off the top. When you hear the term being ready, what are your first thoughts? Chris, you're on the bottom. I'm going to hit you first. What do you got?
I actually really love this question. Folks come to me often like, hey, I need to train for another 2 years before I join the Army or whatever. And you're right, you're never really ready. At some point, you're just gonna have to trust the training that you've gone through. But I also think like the same principle applies to like being a dad or starting a business. You're never really prepared for what's coming down the pipeline. Sometimes you just got to trust your instinct and trust your capabilities and do the best you can, you know.
I like it. John, first thoughts?
Yeah, man, I think a lot of times we want that reassurance of knowing we're ready and we have these specific metrics or whatever the case may be, and that reassurance never comes. So what I always encourage guys is to stop seeking it and start looking at what you can do to start getting those results, because really success in any endeavor comes down to taking a step, encountering a challenge, you know, seeking specific information to overcome those challenges, and then adding different skills to the tool belt and continuing to progress forward.
Bam. I like it. Shaun, how about yourself? First thoughts?
First thoughts are, I'm not sure if anyone is ever fully ready and like in the complete 100% state of readiness. Maybe more correctly, we get real close. But I think the being ready state is actually believing that you're pursuing the ready state. So whether you're ready or not is almost like an academic debatable point. What is of great interest is if you're in the preparation game, if you're in the ready game. And so ready or not, that's maybe a different podcast. Getting ready, believing you're ready, feeling you're ready. Now, those are interesting points for sure.
Well, we are going to be getting into this right away. And beforehand, I just want to hit this up. John jumped in here. Morning, everybody. I'm being ready for this killer show. It's good to see you, John. Now, I have a video right off the bat. We can just dive right into this convo and let's get it kicked off. Here we go.
Individuals in life have one thing in common, according to the Stoics. Seneca says what they all have in common is that they're always getting ready to start. They are delaying to live because they think they have the future, they think they have forever. They say, I'm not ready, or they say, I'm going to do it after. I'm going to do it once this thing happens, when conditions are more favorable. They never say to themselves, I'm never going to do it. They say, I'm going to do it later. But no one knows what the future holds. Life is happening right now, this second. In fact, the time that ticks by, the Stoics say, belongs to death. It's dead. It can never be recovered. So don't be a fool. Don't delay. You could be good today, Marcus Aurelius reminds us, but instead you choose tomorrow.
Bam. What are your thoughts? John, I'm going to hit you first. What do you got?
Yeah, man. There's looking back to everything that I've ever done in my life, I've never felt kind of that completely ready, right? And I think when we seek that feeling, then we continue to put it off. When I started preparing for even special forces selection and things like that, I remember I was that guy that kept putting it off. I wanted to go in March. I was like, I'm just going to give myself a little bit more time to train, and it kept going like that for a while until I finally had a recruiter like, hey, like this is it, like just go this class date. He's like, it doesn't matter, you're physically there, like you're gonna go out there and send it. So I think a lot of times we can get in our heads about, trying to hit these certain metrics or whatever it is, and really what it comes down to is you just got to start taking action, and that readiness will flush itself out.
I really like that. The concept of just give her, see what happens, and then you can make a decision from there. Chris, you got any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I definitely agree with what John said. If I can tell a quick story, so I don't know how to ski, and one of the trips that I took on my first team was in the mountains of Germany to do a wet or winter immersion training. And the first day, I was on the bunny slope with like one of the German guys that were helping us out, and I was doing the pizza pie French fry thing, trying to figure out how to stay on top of the snow and not fall down. And it was rough. But like day 3, our job was to skin up to the top of this mountain and then ski back down. And my buddy Travis, he is a phenomenal skier. He does like the backflips off his stuff. And I'm looking down this mountain. I'm like, bro, I don't know if I'm ready for this. And he's like, nah, dude, tips down, just own the mountain, go. And so I did, and for sure wiped out most of the way down. But I think that's an important part of the process, like being okay with failing or stumbling along the way to get those reps in, to get the kind of that experience under your belt. And then so the next time you tackle a mountain, whatever that mountain is, you're like, I remember what this is like. I can anticipate kind of these potential downfalls, but I'm more confident in my capability because I've done it once already.
The idea that wiping out is a good thing right off the bat because now you know what it feels like, and you're like, oh, well, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. All right, I think I can handle it, and you can kind of carry on from there. I like this. Shaun, what are your thoughts?
Kind of like Chris, I got a bit of a skiing story when I first got into the Army. So 1984, we went over to Norway for a month. And this isn't going to be a big Army story. It's relevant to the topic at hand. And so we got towed up to the top of this mountain by a BV-206. And at the top of the mountain, we finally got to see we're looking out at the ocean, finally got to see the sun creep up just for a quarter of an inch above the ocean, and then went back down again. That was it for daylight that day. So that was the first time we'd actually seen the sun in over 4 weeks. And my point being, as we were skiing down that mountain, most of us didn't really know what we were doing. We were in the white mucklucks, the Army issue winter mucklucks, and we were on the Army issue bangy boards, the things that cost about $12 to make and have like no technical aspects to them. And it was canvas webbing strapping us in. And so I don't even know how many times all of us fell down going down that mountain. Here's a really important aspect of that moment. I got introduced to going hard, charging hard, kicking that ass, making a ton of mistakes. I got introduced to it on that mountain with a bunch of guys who also didn't know what they were doing. And we were just giving her and laughing every time we wiped out. Pull your silly head out of the snow, shake the snow out of your nostrils, and then get back at it again. Everyone racing to the bottom. See who could be the worst skier first. And so I think what is important is how you come up when it comes to these kind of things, who you come up with, why you're coming up the way that you're coming up. All of these aspects of our young life set us up for our future. So, back then, I didn't know what I was doing. No one did, but we just did. And so the action got us all to where we needed to be many years later.
That brings up an interesting thought on shared failure. right? If you can be with a bunch of people that really don't know what you're doing and you can all fail together, it kind of makes it easier to manage, at least in my mind. But there's also something on the side of being on your own and just failing consistently over time. I'm wondering what you guys' thoughts on that. John, you think there's something about having a crew around you when you're screwing it all up?
Oh yeah, having that failure or shared hardship in general is huge. When I first joined the military, I enlisted as EOD, which is explosive ordnance disposal, highly academic school, and kind of up until that point, I was somebody that skated by in a lot of things, and I always like assumed I could continue to demonstrate that and continue to skate by. Got a rude awakening and experienced that big failure. There was a lot of us, right? You go to the fifth floor of the building, and that's like the failure floor, and you're surrounded by everybody that just failed this course, waiting for new orders because your needs of the Army for the 6-year contract, right? But looking back on that experience, I am so thankful that I didn't just get to skate by again, because the the entire time that I experienced it, I obviously was like embarrassed, had a lot of emotions associated with it, but it was really kind of that catalyst on what got me to think and open my eyes to what real work looks like and what it actually takes to demonstrate consistency and resiliency on a daily basis. So I think, we tend to shy away from failure because we see it as this thing that's black and white. And if we fail, we're never going to succeed. But I think the better way to look at it is we can learn a lot from it. And if our goals are big enough and we're putting ourselves out there the way we should and chasing these, big, hairy, audacious goals, then we should expect failure along the way and learn everything we can from it.
I really like that. Chris, you got any thoughts on this?
Yeah, John's super smart. Yeah, I totally agree with everything what he just said, and I'm kind of reminded of a quote. Let's see if I remember. It's good decisions come from experience, and experience comes from poor decisions. And doesn't necessarily mean you have to make bad decisions on purpose, but in order to learn and to be better prepared for life moving forward, you have to experience that failure. I think at least some. If you have somehow gotten through life and gotten 100% on everything, I'm not entirely sure you're challenging yourself enough. And kind of back to the question, like having a group of people that are kind of struggling through a process together is good, because you kind of share that hardship, and interestingly, that often brings people closer together, which then makes a more cohesive team, which then makes you better capable to tackle the next challenge as a unit. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm tracking on that one. John, you got any thoughts?
I do. So I was lucky in my career that I kind of got dragged down it. So kind of like a tractor beam pulling me in directions that I didn't really have planned. And always the Army was dragging me into harder stuff. And so I never really got to say, nah, I'm not going to do that hard stuff. They kind of told me, you're going to do that hard stuff. And I liked it. So that was easy for me to kind of follow their lead, as it were. Of course, I shaped it to some degree. I chose some things, but it was put in front of me and I got to do it. But not everyone gets it put in front of them like a challenge. Sometimes you've got to walk into the rooms that you don't belong in, and know that you don't belong in, and feel super uncomfortable in that room as you're not belonging in it, and then try to belong. That's the way it is. You've got to earn your way in uncomfortable moments and in uncomfortable rooms. And so that's what I tried to do, was earn my way in any room that I went into, in any situation I was in. And inevitably, if you're in a room that you barely belong in, and you're trying to keep up with all of the hard chargers in that room, you're going to fail a bunch of times. And here's the good news. When you're sitting on the floor of the 5th floor failure academy, guess what? You're probably looking at some other dudes who are also super freaking smart and squared away, and who you thought, man, I'm not going to make it, but they are. When you're in the moment with guys who you think are going to make it, and you realize none of you are going to make it, that's the place to be. If you've got to do 2 reps, 3 reps, if you've got to rep that thing out for the rest of your life until you finally pass it, I think that's awesome. Where you're sitting on the floor surrounded by quote unquote failures who are people that you're looking at as superheroes. I love that moment. It's great context. And as Chris said, John comes across as a super smart guy. So when he was on the 5th floor, I bet it freaking stung like crazy. Those are the best moments, because that's context, as John knows, as he's already said. Capable individuals need 5th floor moments, not on a constant basis, but on a regular enough basis that it snaps you to attention, shakes the success off you, and almost takes you to your knees from time to time, just to not humble a person, but to recalibrate a person that nothing is easy.
This reminds me of a point in time, and I've told the story before, but John, you were talking about skating through, of just kind of like, having either a physical or mental capability to just kind of work through everything. It's like, oh, just to succeed. Okay, cool. I'll do whatever needs to be done, and I'll do it. And I had a very similar experience throughout my military time in as well, to the point that I had one of my sergeants come up to me and say, "Hey, man, you want to be on the dive course?" And I was like, "No, I want to be a jumper, not a diver." And he went, "Okay," and they walked off. And that was the only opportunity I had for it. Had I realized at the time, I would have gotten my jump course after I'd done the dive course. That's beside the thing. But up until that point, I had never really had any sort of major failure. And looking at the dive course, I was looking at it as oh, I'm not ready for it. I've watched other people go through it. There's no way I can complete it. I had already defeated myself ahead of time because I thought I wasn't ready. And I think it's an interesting point to bring up, in the fact that a lot of us just kind of get by without really challenging ourselves, without really seeking that discomfort, as Shaun was saying, of having someone be like, "Nope, you're on the dive course. Deal with it." Not a lot of us get that opportunity. I think that's an interesting point to it. I'm going to come back around. John, you got any other thoughts on any of this?
Yeah, man. I think you brought up a good point of you didn't want to potentially go to the dive, and there's a lot of guys that don't want to do things where maybe they have a good track record, they've been successful up until this point, and they don't want to go to a school or take an opportunity where they can fail, and then others can look at them as like, "Oh, you failed at something, you're human," type of thing, right? So this is something that comes up a lot, especially with the younger guys, primarily in my program. And the question I like to ask them is, hypothetically speaking, if you were in an environment where nobody in the entire world would ever find out if you failed, would you hesitate in doing it? Usually the answer is no, right? So a lot of times that fear of failure is not coming from us and our fear of failure, but the fear of what others will think of us if we fail.
I really like that. Chris, you got any additional thoughts?
No, I thought that was spot on. And I totally agree. Oftentimes that pressure that we are feeling is external. It is that fear of somebody else finding out that we didn't quite measure up. I think it was back in 2017. It was right after we got home from Estonia and stuff. My buddy and I decided we were going to go try out for a bigger and better unit. And so we trained up for a long time. And I was probably in the best shape of my life at that point. I had leaned down, lost like maybe 10 pounds of unnecessary. And I was just super fast. And then went to the mountains of West Virginia and tried it. And it didn't work out. I had to come back home with my head hanging low. But it was a good experience because not everybody even tries, and so in that particular instance, did I feel ready? Yeah, I thought I was ready for sure, but maybe not quite,
The idea of feeling ready and still failing. That's a great lesson to learn. Shaun, you got any thoughts on this?
Yeah, like the boys say, I mean, the moment that the world knows you're about to do something redonkulous, the pressure is on. And then you get to decide before you tell the world that you're about to do something redonkulous, whether you're going to tell the world. I mean, we're all motivated differently. Sometimes when I want to be a freak, I'll tell everyone that I'm going to be a freak. Sometimes I just freak by myself. And then once it's done, I'll let the world know, hey, guess what I've been freaking on for the last 12 years? You're welcome. And so I love the ambush of the 12-year freak show. And I also love the ambush of telling the world that you're about to cross the freak show start line and then hammering in on day 3. Incredibly embarrassing with your arse on fire. Bad. So, like, put it out there. It doesn't matter what happens, whether you win, lose, or draw. I mean, honestly, I was going to say who cares, but it actually is not that big of a deal as to which way it goes. There's lessons in all of it. There's lessons by keeping it secret. There's lessons by proclaiming that you're going to be king of the world by tomorrow. There's lessons in all of it. But it all requires action. Even the inaction part of never doing anything about becoming a freak, just the very fact that you say it, the action of saying it, and then not delivering on it years later, it's action still that you're going to learn a lesson from, regret or whatever the case is. All actions have lessons because all actions have consequences, good or bad consequences, neither here nor there. But action is mandatory to figure all of this stuff out.
This reminds me of when I first I wanted to join the army since I was little, and I just never did it up until my brother actually hit me up on a phone call and he was like, well, what's stopping you? And I had to process that. And I was like, nothing is stopping me. And then I was like, okay. And then I went down to the recruiter the next day. But I think we get in our heads a lot of times of just the things that we create obstacles in our own way to prevent us from getting somewhere, or, well, oh, I'll get to it tomorrow, as the video was saying. Of just like, yeah, well, you think you have time. You really don't. I think this is a fantastic point. Any other thoughts on that? I got another video I can hum up on if you guys are ready to go. All right, let's hit it. Here we go.
Of your life is in direct proportion to the amount of uncertainty that you can comfortably put up with. So people who always need to have that certainty, they don't lead a very comfortable life usually, because either everything's already arranged and they discover nothing new because they already know today where they're going to be on day 3 of their holiday, or something goes wrong and they get all upset about it. And, you know, the measure of a person is what it takes to stop you.
Let's pass this around. Chris, I'm going to hit you first. What do you think?
Yeah, I like that a lot. So something I tell folks often in regards to why I joined the Army was because I wanted to pursue something where success was not guaranteed. I wanted to challenge myself with that uncertainty and potentially give my all to something and still come up short. I'm not a fan of participation trophies, and so I'm not looking for that super comfortable, like everything's laid out and planned out for me for the next 20 years. You know, I'm very interested in pursuing things that are difficult on purpose. So yeah, I like that video.
Difficult on purpose. I like that. John, any thoughts?
Yeah, I really like the quote at the end of it. The measure of a person is what it takes to stop you. Right. That is awesome. And what that means to me is not stop you in the short term. Not like, you know, have those failures, and that to me is not stopping, but stop you completely. Does it get you to change your path and then just sit there without continuing to move forward? So yeah, I really like that quote. Another thing with that is I think a lot of times, you know, well, I lost my train of thought there. But I think a lot of times, you know, we have this like fallacy, especially in today's day and age with Instagram and social media and stuff like that, that life's perfect purpose is to get to a point of comfortability. And I don't think that's life's purpose at all. At least not mine. And a lot of the guys I know, we can have those times where we can relax. I went to a trip to Mexico last week and relaxed on the beach for a couple of days. But ultimately, if I were to do that every day and go to the beach and hang out, I would have a lot of internal conflict because I know I'm not living up to my potential. And I think when we seek comfort and prioritize comfort above all else, then we have that disconnection of who we really want to be and the things that we want to accomplish and build throughout our lifetimes. There's a cool concept that I like to kind of refer back to called entropy. And entropy is just the state of decay, essentially. And if something is not getting constant effort and progressing forward, then it is progressing backwards and kind of going into that state of chaos, right? And I think we are the exact same way. When we are in these comfortable environments, we are regressing back and falling into the rule of entropy and not making or maintaining the person we are or could be.
Yeah, could not agree with that more. That so many times of just wanting to sit on the couch and do nothing, but then by doing that, you're in your head, and your head is telling you all the things that you should be doing right now instead of sitting on the couch watching TV. Shaun, you got any thoughts on this?
Yeah, and while you're sitting there with all the thoughts, entropy is in effect. You're dying quicker than you are when you're actually doing something, and so entropy is always in effect. It's just to what scale, intensity, velocity, I suppose. And thinking about entropy as the example, if we apply sort of the idea that complex adaptive systems or human beings interacting with other human beings, in that initial interaction, that edge of chaos moment where there's sort of a initiation and then a calibration and then pattern formation and the normal sequence of events in order for two complex adaptive systems to interact. When that's going on, if you're stubborn about the entire process, if you have something in your mind as to my action in this moment is X, I always do X stubbornly forever. Stubborn is good. I've got a bit of a reputation as being stubborn, and stubborn is going to always get you far. But sometimes it'll take you in the wrong direction initially. Sometimes it'll take you in the wrong direction at the back end. And so being stubborn or being dogmatic about your action orientation, no matter what comes at me, I'm just going to keep forging ahead. That's a good mantra. It is. As long as you can stay open-minded enough that your stubbornness is not just in a singular direction, in a linear fashion, like a laser beam. You've got to have the fluidity of stubbornness in order to recalibrate your trajectory in the real time, which in and of itself is less stubborn and more just action orientation, fluid real-time motion. And so how you think of these things is kind of how you start to live. And so I guess I'll take it right back to a simplistic wraparound or conclusion. And that is, in all of these moments when we're being stubborn in trying to do something, it doesn't always mean that that is the best or the gold standard approach. You've got to also keep an open mind.
This, yeah, I got a couple images in my head when you're talking about being stubborn and the difference between, say, you guys know who the Rhino is in terms of like Spider-Man comic books, stuff like that. Rhino will just smash through things, singular, linearly, directly. But then I was also thinking about the Blob, right, from back in the 50s, that old school movie. But that, like, the consistent rolling forward, molding around obstacles rather than hitting them and smashing them, you're just enveloping them and carrying on. And I think that's, to your point, Shaun, kind of where you need to be. Something that clicked in my mind here, John, when you were talking was the American dream. This concept of you want to create a life of almost luxury, of ease, of relaxation, of you work for however long and then you can retire and you can just sit back on your porch and sit there with a shotgun and tell people get off your lawn, whatever you want to do. But I'm wondering, do you think that this is a societal reflection nowadays is where we have this concept of, I just want to be able to not do anything, versus a more instinctual level of like the fact that we're animals and we want to be relaxed unless we're hunting, kind of deal. What do you guys think? Chris, I'm gonna hit you first. What do you got?
I like that you brought up the American dream. As I understand it, it's the American dream is that you can start from nothing and build something substantial and create the life that you want because you went out and took it, right? And I think that's actually the part of the dream that everyone likes, that the struggle and the hard work that it's going to take to achieve maybe that life of luxury, or maybe the life of sitting on your porch telling people to get off your lawn. I'm a firm believer that yes, we are biological animals that tend to want to rest unless hunting or reproducing, right? But I think on like a psychological level, I think humans are really only fulfilled and satisfied when they're struggling for something. And I would argue that if you don't have like a real struggle in life that you're facing that is actually challenging you, people tend to make struggles up. And I've noticed a pattern of people choosing to be offended by things that shouldn't matter, because there is no struggle. And so there's this tendency to kind of create struggle. That's my thoughts.
I like that. John, you got any thoughts on this?
Yeah, actually, I was sitting on the couch with my wife last night, and I had this thought that popped into my mind. I was like, how crazy is it that out of the tons and tons of different species on Earth, that humans alone are so far ahead intellectually, right? There's a massive gap. And kind of like what Chris said, we have a lot of those primal, things rooted into us that every species on Earth has, which is we want to rest, feed, and breed, right? But I think one of the things that comes along with the intelligence is the desire to experience that hardship and the desire to build. And I think in today's day and age, like Chris said, if there's not a challenge presented, people usually present a challenge, and it's not always the most productive for them or those around them. But I also think with the ease of information, which is great, and I love it, but I also think it's a double-edged sword, because I think a lot of times it can undermine people's creativity. Now, instead of being creative and finding a solution, talking to people, getting different perspectives, implementing it, trying it out, iterating through the process, we can ChatGPT it and find out the best possible answer, or so we think. And I think a lot of times with that, we take that information, that cookie cutter information that may not apply to us, and we try to apply it to our lives. And then we fit that mold instead of creating our lives with what we genuinely want them to look like based off of our creativity.
We just did a show on nutrition a little while ago, about 2.5 hours. And I think the main crux of the whole argument throughout the entire show was that nutrition is so personal that it's not really anything that you can set up ahead of time and say, oh, well, this will be perfect for X amount of people. It's like one for one. You gotta dive right into it. Shaun, you got any thoughts?
I do. So the American dream, as I understand it, is a construct driven down by some nefarious agency called the American Dream Creators, whoever they are. Who are they? Anyone know? Anyone know where their office is? So it's a phenomenon. It's a social construct that is, as more and more people buy into whatever the dream is, the dream becomes more and more realistic or entrenched within the construct of the culture. And so there's maybe a thing called an American dream, but more importantly, there should be a personal dream. Whoever that person is within the many millions of people in the United States that are dreaming right now, my fingers are crossed that it isn't the American dream. It is their personal dream, whatever that means to them. Because the American dream, much like the Canadian dream, which is also a construct, is something that shouldn't drive our lives. It's a large societal construct that contains a lot of people that is passing down a message that all those people should be familiar with. This is how you're going to live your life. And I choose not to live that way. I choose to live my dream, my life, what I like to do, what I think is important to me, what is important to the people around me. That sense of mission, that sense of action, that sense of being a good dude. None of those things actually fit into the American or the Canadian dream. Because, as you stated, Chance, the idea being that at one point you become successful, whatever that means, where you have some sort of financial liberty, whatever that means, that you can sit on your front porch with a rocking chair and yell at kids on the front lawn. Now there's all kinds of freedom there, I suppose, but that ain't my dream, because it's not enough. But it's enough for others. And it's enough for some out there that that's all they want. And that's awesome. As long as they know that they decided that that's what they want, rather than being told that's what you're hopefully going to achieve one day, Jimmy. And I don't buy into that. I think that Jimmy needs his own dream. That may not have Jimmy on his front porch. That may have him fly fishing in Montana or hunt an elk up in Alaska, whatever it is. Jimmy gets to decide. And so if Jimmy doesn't know where he's going to lay his dreams out for the future, I'd say worry less about the American dream and the Canadian dream and start looking around a little more regionally, a little closer. What are your friends trying to live as a dream? When you step into that room that you want to be in, what are all of those people dreaming for themselves, rather than the construct that's passed down on basically a continental level?
So this is interesting, and it is rattling around in my brain here. Is the difference between the Canadian/American dream, like the dream, versus my dream, versus your dream? And I think that is the crux of this. In that, if we're seeking out someone else's dream, it's not going to be fulfilling in any way, I don't think. But if it's ours, if it's what we really want, then that's where you'll get your fulfilling point from. And I did a program called Shaping Purpose years ago that was designed to help veterans transition out of the military and get, moving in their life, find new purpose, that kind of stuff. And it got started as a Fortune 500, CEOs, high level people who have worked their whole lives. They now get to retire. They're like 55. They have millions of dollars in the bank, and they just discovered that they hate golf and don't want to sail anywhere. Yeah, like, now what? But I think that happens a lot. I think there's many people out there that will work their whole lives for this concept that was sold to them as a child or sold to them as a young adult, and have never thought past it. So I'm wondering, what do you guys tell people when you meet them, or when they come to you for help and say, "Hey man, I don't know where I want to go. I don't have no purpose. I have no thing, and I don't know where to start." What do you guys think, John? I'm gonna hit you first.
Yeah, this is a question we get pretty often, especially kind of, with the background Chris and I have coming from the Army, Special Forces world. We get a lot of guys that want to go that route because it sounds like something really cool and they like the idea of it, but it's not something that they genuinely want to do, something that they feel they have to do to try to prove that they're worthy of other people's respect or whatever the case may be. So a lot of times what I like to ask guys is, what are your goals, your own or that of someone else's agenda for your life, right? Because a lot of times we can, we have outside pressures. Maybe we have friends saying that you should do this, you'd be really great here, and we can kind of succumb to it because we want to be quick to know what we're doing with our life. But I think for a lot of guys, especially that younger crowd, it's okay to not have this clear vision or know exactly what we want to do with our life. You have time to experiment, try different things out, and then follow the fire, kind of follow what brings you the most passion and what fires you up to go do, not just what others want for you or what you think others want for you.
Love that. Following the fire. That's a great line. Chris, you got any additional thoughts?
Yeah, I get hit with kind of that question often. Is like, you know, should I pursue the Lamborghini and the life of luxury? And that's why when I start my coaching, I always ask them, like, all right, tell me who you want to be first before what you want to achieve. Like, what kind of man or woman do you want to be at the end of the day? Because that is actually going to have a greater influence on the kind of goals you should be chasing, in my opinion. And the example I use is like, you start chasing after the Lambo and the mansion and the yacht, and maybe somebody who's like, you should be a doctor or a lawyer, and you start pursuing that, and you realize, all I really wanted was some peace and quiet with a cabin in the woods, and if you can establish that identity, who you want to be first, you now have a filter or a lens by which you can say no to things that are external, because you have a very clear vision on like the kind of life that you want to end up with. And so if you get this external pressure or this external suggestion, you can say, I appreciate that, but no, that doesn't align with the kind of life I want to live at the end of the day. So yeah, I think it's super important to figure out if you like, to John's point, like if you like the idea of a goal or if you actually want the goal. Guys come to me often asking about, SF or special operations in general, and I'm sure John is pretty good at this too, but I can determine rather quickly if somebody just likes the idea of being a Green Beret or if they actually want to do the job. And figuring that out early is way better than being in the middle of the Q course or selection and saying, man, I hate this,
And we all know the job is very rarely like the commercials. Very rarely. Shaun, you got any thoughts on this?
I do. So I said this recently in another podcast platform, and the platform took a little clip of me saying it and then put it out, and now it's being viewed quite a few times. And the clip kind of goes along these lines. I'm asked fairly often by young men, hey, Shaun, how do I become you? And that's paraphrasing it. And so it could have easily been, how do I become Chris? How do I become John? And so my answer is pretty much always the same. Why do you want that? Now write down how you're going to become that. Now, the last two parts that screws everything up for everyone. Figure out how long it's going to take you to get there, your timeline, how long you want to take, 1 year or 10 years, whatever. And then the velocity matches the timeline. And so, Chris and John, I'm sure you've heard it lots. I've heard it lots. Hey, I've got this dream. It's a dreamy McDream, and I want it really bad. Okay, good. Here's all the hows you're going to do that. The moment that how list is created, and that how list has things written down like blood, sweat, and tears in it, that's when the timeline and velocity piece fall apart. They actually don't get engaged because the dream becomes a nightmare if there's action put to the dream. And so it's, how bad does someone want the nightmare? Their why. How bad do they want it? And we all know how it goes. If you want it bad enough, you'll have bad dreams for months at a time until you finally get what you want. That's the nightmare. But the happy dream is the dream that is repeated every 24-hour cycle, and that is, man, one day I'm going to grow up to be that superstar that I want to be. It doesn't fall out of trees with gravity. You've got to go earn it through action, and then there comes the nightmare part. And so, do you want to face the sting or not? That's what it all comes down to. And generally, if the sting really stings, most people will bail on the timeline and velocity. And so now it's just a dream.
Bam. And yeah, I guess to that point, they were not really even ready to engage in their own dream at that point. I think that's awesome. Now I have another video here, unless you guys got any other thoughts on that before we move on. Guys good to go? All right, let's hit it. Here we go.
This idea of trying to fail.
What do you mean?
Just think about that. Try to make a bad painting. Try to act badly. Try to be lousy in that scene. It's interesting. It kind of puts the idea of striving for perfection on. You know, it does something. You've got to find ways to let you not worry and be free, you know? That's all. Once again, we're talking triggers, you know? If you're content to fail, or you accept it somewhere, and I only mention this because you talk about being hard on yourself, because the idea of being hard on yourself is kicking yourself for not doing better, not doing better, not doing better. So you got to deal with this striving impulse, which can hurt you, you know? You need enough to get you in movement and get you trying things, but you don't need so much that it suffocates you, that you're uptight. Well, also, you put yourself in situations where you can't control things. And that's why, you know, people say, that's so risky. You know, it's only risky if it's not risky, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's only risky if it's not risky, meaning...
If it's a real risk, you're trying something.
Right.
Something will happen. Something will be learned.
Bam. Let's get some thoughts on that. John, I'm going to hit you first. What do you got?
Yeah, man, love that. The only risk is if it's not risky, right? I kind of relate this, like a kind of a tangible example of this is a lot of times when I'm writing. You know, a lot of my content and ideas, my personal like development, things like that, all stems from my ability to write. And a lot of times I'll have kind of that writer's block, and I'll sit down and I'm like, I have no idea what to write about, right? But what I always kind of tell myself is just write something poor, write something. It doesn't matter if it sounds good. It doesn't matter if it looks good. It doesn't even matter if it makes sense. The important thing is that you're putting words on the paper. And then as you progress into that, you get a couple minutes in, you string some sentences together and you're like, wow, now I have an idea. So I think that on the larger scale, you know, we don't need to strive for perfection in everything we do. You know, another thing that I wanted to talk about too was the kind of the timeline of things. You know, we get a finite amount of life, years to our life. And with these big goals we have, typically they take multiple years to achieve if it's big enough, right? So kind of when I look at that is we only get a couple opportunities to really pursue a big goal throughout our life. It could be 5, 10, whatever the case may be. Those big goals that take many years to accomplish. So choose them wisely and make sure you're choosing something with a little bit of risk, so you're not risking, you know, the potential you're leaving on the table.
Love it. Chris, got any thoughts?
Yeah, I heard this like parable, I guess you could call it, but this art professor was he was an art professor at some college, and so the assignment was to make pottery. And so he had one class, and he was like, all right, you have one assignment, and that is to make one perfect piece of pottery. And then his other class, he was like, your only assignment is to make 100 pieces of pottery. Ready, go. And so they had all semester to bang it out. And at the end of the day, what he found was the individuals that were assigned the 100 pieces of pottery wound up producing significantly better pieces than the individuals that were assigned one piece of pottery, because they just had the repetitions in, and they didn't have to worry about it being perfect. They just had to do it 100 times. And I think about that a lot, and being okay if something isn't perfect, which is difficult, kind of coming from like John and I's background. Like excellence is expected, right? But I'm also super comfortable with just like, I just got to get the reps in, you know, and if I get enough reps in, I will actually get pretty good at whatever it is that I'm pursuing.
I like this. And I've been thinking about this for a little while, because Shaun has this line that he always uses, which is the relentless pursuit of excellence. But excellence doesn't mean perfection. It just means excellence. And I think that's a key point to this. Those two things are not the same. Shaun, you got any thoughts at all?
Yeah, not only are they not the same, but they're also not the same psychology, the same focus. So if you're pursuing perfection and you believe it's achievable, then maybe there's a time where you kind of dial it back because you're close. versus the relentless pursuit of excellence. That's just trying to get better always at anything, everything. And so I like the idea of what the video was saying for sure. I don't think it captured the fullness of this conversation, that's for sure. But like the fellas brought up, all good points, so I'm in line with them.
Bam. I like it. The interesting part for me, and this is something else, is that the collective is a great example of this. And I was telling John before we got started here, was the fact that we did a show a day every day for all of last year, and the initial episodes, they weren't horrible, but they weren't great. they weren't our best work, but it was the reps. It was the fact that this is 450 episode in, excuse me, that we are now 450 episodes in. We have the reps. We have the ability to consistently seek for more and better and higher goals without having to rely on the fact of, oh, we're going to have it perfect tomorrow. This next episode is going to be perfect. It's just consistently better every time. And I think it's a perfect example. I'm going to go around again. John, you got any additional thoughts, anything?
Yeah, I completely agree. And, kind of starting my content creation journey, much like yourself, is I experienced that firsthand. I look back at some of my content I put out a year ago and I'm like, ugh, that is disgusting. Why would I do that? But, a year from now, I'm going to look back at what I'm doing now and I'm going to have the same feelings towards it. So repetition is, iteration is what I seek and is really how we improve.
Yeah, and that's a great point in the difference between repetitions versus iterations. Chris, you got any thoughts on the difference between those?
I don't know. I was just going to totally agree with what John said. All of us make content here, and I for sure look back on some of my early stuff, and I'm like, geez, man, what were you doing? Get your life together. and for sure, in a couple of years, I'll probably look back at recent stuff and say the same thing, because the pursuit of progress, I think, is what's important. I'm not entirely sure perfection is achievable, but it's a good thing to strive for. But more importantly, the progress on a daily basis or weekly basis is what I think is important.
Yeah, 100%. Shaun, any thoughts?
I wasn't going to say, but I think we've got time. I'll do it anyway. So John had mentioned that he likes writing, and that he's not even sure what he's going to write. He starts scribbling something down, and he builds off of that, and eventually maybe he's got something that he likes or not. But the writing thing is simply an act of creativity, and so going to the root cause or the root issue or the root start of that idea of wanting to write, it's not the act of writing that has to happen, it's the act of creation that has to happen, because John could do that with a camera, he could do that riding a horse, he could do that in the weight room, he could do it lots of places. The act of creation. And so that creativity, like Chris having recently written his book, that maybe it's a compulsion. But I think perhaps at its very elemental state, it was driven into us. It was taught to us in our military careers to want to produce, to want to create, to want to shape something with our talents. And so even at its fundamentals, we were created to be creative in the moment. And then if it's actually in us, if the spirit of creation is in us, now it's a double dip. We were taught to do it, and it's actually who we are. And so, how long do you fight that? How long do you ignore it? How long does John not write? Well, if John's anything like me, he's gonna have to ambush himself throughout the day so as not to write. I want to write immediately after this podcast. I want to write before the podcast. I love the act of thinking about writing. And that doesn't mean that I'm going to write pages and pages of stuff. It just means that I want to create. And I don't even think of myself as a content creator, because that title in and of itself has kind of a negative connotation for me. So I just nowadays think of myself as a creative person that wants to, almost needs to be creative. And so if you're not being creative in your day, but that's who you are, the cognitive dissonance of that can be problematic. So for everyone out there who isn't writing or isn't taking photos or isn't in front of a microphone or doing these things, putting themselves out there publicly, give it a try. See where it goes. Even if you're fearful of putting it up in front of the internet, put it up in front of your own nose and see how it feels. Do it for 3-4 weeks in a row. See where it takes you. Creativity could be the thing that you're missing. The spark could be the mission that you've been missing for a long time. And we all know that right now, men in particular are suffering. They're struggling with their sense of identity. If they're not getting it at work, if they're not getting it at home, if they're not getting it with the sports team, maybe they can get it by grabbing a pen and paper and scribbling a few paragraphs out and seeing how that feels, owning their own destiny through a pen to some degree.
Ready or not, just giving it. I like it. Now, we are running short on time. I know, Chris, you got timing to hit. So, you got any final thoughts before you jump off here?
Yeah. First, I always love having these conversations. So I'm honored that you brought me on, and I'm grateful. So thank you. But yeah, I guess going back to the original topic, being ready is, I think, a mindset thing. Like, you're never really ready. So just take that first step, start moving towards the thing that you're pursuing, and just own the mountain.
Like it, own the mountain. Well, Chris, it is our pleasure having you. So if you got to jump, by all means, you can take off. But thank you again for hanging out with us. It's always a pleasure. John, you got any final thoughts on anything else we've gone over today?
Yeah, man, I wanted to share a quote. This is, I read the book Crime and Punishment recently. I'm a little behind the curve. Probably should have read it a long time ago. But there was a quote in there that really stuck out to me. And I think it's applicable for, having that need for being ready. It says, so a man will sometimes go through half an hour of mortal terror with a brigand, yet when the knife is at his throat at last, he feels no fear. And I think a lot of times, we could probably all resonate with that. We get this anxiety built up prior to taking the first step, prior to jumping in, prior to taking the action. But once we're in it, once we're in the thick of it, once we're in the trenches, we don't feel that. So kind of just a little bit of perspective on what lies ahead when you do take that first step. A lot of times action alleviates that anxiety.
100%. I can tell you from personal experience, there's lots of people that I get anxious about rolling with on the mats. And the moment we tap bump, that anxiety goes away because I don't have time to think about it. Shaun, you got any final thoughts?
Yeah, I'm going to throw a quote out there as well, unprepared, so I hope I get it right. It's a pretty short one. I usually don't botch it. It's from Dune, and the quote is, "Fear is the mind killer." And so I think it's one of the greatest quotes out there, certainly from that novel. And it directly ties into what John just said in respect to action. Fear will always stop you from acting accordingly or not. Action is the thing that you have to pursue. Whether you do it right or wrong, the lesson will show itself somewhere down the path, but action is mandatory. So never fear to step across the start line.
Man, I love it. I have one little piece to add on to this. I got asked this on a podcast I was a guest on just a little while ago, and they asked me for those people that are out there who are struggling or having difficulty getting going, or they have this concept, but they just don't know where to begin and all these things. And they asked me what tip I would give them for it. And I said, start. That's where it all begins, is once you actually put your foot forward into the next thing. And if I had not bought a microphone and a camera and started podcasting 5-6 years ago, we wouldn't be here, right? There's so many things in my life that I can bring up that I just took the first step and then let things unfold from there. that allow me to now sit here and have these types of conversations. And I think that's a key thing for a lot of people, is that you just got to start. Once you start, then you can figure the rest out. But a lot of us just sit around hoping, wishing, dreaming that it'll start for us, rather than taking the time to, or taking the action to actually begin it. So thank you. This has been a fantastic conversation, John and Shaun, and Chris, who is obviously gone, but this has been a great combo. So thank you guys. And yeah, I don't have anything else to add. So this is fantastic. And as we all continue to learn, build, and grow, we'll see y'all next week.
Thanks,
Come
guys.
on.